Cape Coast Castle was originally built in the late 17th century by the Swedes for trade purposes, and later became a major center for the transatlantic slave trade under the British. It was one of the largest slave trading posts in West Africa, and thousands of enslaved Africans were held here before being shipped across the Atlantic.
How many castles did they build nationwide?
Are you talking of Ghana?
Yeah, I'm talking about
Just Ghana, we have about 40 to 42 fort and castles that spread along the coast of West Africa. But then, in total, the coast of West Africa, about 60 of them were built. So if Ghana could hold over 40 of them, that should tell you that their focus was actually here. Africans themselves practice slavery.
Oh, wow.
Yes, we practice slavery, just that our system of slavery was different from what the Europeans brought in here. So those days, if I do fight your group and I defeat your team, I'll fuse them into my system to grow. Okay. From a village, I can actually grow to become, let's say, a community. Communities can grow into, let's say, states. States became kingdoms and kingdoms became empire.
Considering everything that happened earlier over here, why do we still call it a castle instead of a dungeon?
The structure we see here is a castle.
Okay.
Just that it played the role of a dungeon, more of being a castle. But in the years, you can't tell me that humans were not staying in here. So you can choose to call it a dungeon, you can choose to call it a castle.
Matter of choice.
Yes, matter of choice, let me put it that way.
You made mention of priests.
Yes.
Did religion play any role in the administration of the castles?
Yes, the religion actually played a role in the trade. You know, I always say that once you start to talk about this whole transatlantic slave trade and the church involvement in there, sometimes people even actually tell you that you're not actually a Christian, that you are this, you are that. And that's the truth. Religion played a major role in the trade. I made mention even the suggestion that was made by a man for the whole system to start was a Catholic priest. And if a Catholic priest actually could make the suggestion, it means they had a hand in the trade. And those days too, the same amount the traders were making, the same amount that the kings and queens were making, the church also made similar money. That is why the traditional churches like the Anglican Church, the Methodist Church, the Catholic Church, the Presbyterian Church earlier were that rich. Before today we had the Pentecostals and others in there. So they played a role. And even in this castle alone, they had two churches operating here.
Two churches.
Anglican Church was established first, before later the Methodist Church also came in. And the Anglican Church was actually right above the male slave dungeons. So whilst others were down there shouting, screaming for their lives, living within their pools and all that, others also were right above them, would say, love your neighbor as yourself. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery.
That's too hard.
And that shall not also steal.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Ni's Experience here again, and in today's video I am actually here at the Cape Coast Castle, and I'm here with my interviewee who I'm going to ask so many questions about the Cape Coast Castle and why it's actually here. Please, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm in the person of Abankwa Thomas. I'm an educational officer here. We do talk about history in terms of the transatlantic slave trade. I happen to be a tourism student, and right after school I also got engaged in some historians where I used to help them with some little research, and God being so good, I had an opportunity to work here, and here you found me.
What are castles built for in the first place?
Alright, so once you talk about castles itself, you know, castles are meant for kings, or let me say queens, to stay in. But then in the context of African system where Europeans came in here, the castles and the forts were built as dungeons for keeping humans, or let me say for keeping captives before shipment. Just that, like I said, we have two types, being the castle and the forts. Most of the forts, some serve as watchtower, others
Watchtower?
Yes, others were garrisons, let's say soldiers were staying in there, and majority of them serving as dungeons to keep captives before shipment.
What were the watchtowers supposed to watch over?
As we always say, profitable business do attract competitors, and for that the Europeans themselves knew others would come fight them. So for that they had to build these towers just to protect them from enemies coming in. So once they are in the watchtower, they can get to detect enemies coming from afar, and they would inform those in the main place they were having their business.
You made mention that profitable business attracts competitors.
Yes.
What business was that?
Those days, the human business, I mean. You know, Europeans do say they came in for gold, let me say natural resource in Africa, but at the point the demand shifted to humans, or because they got to the New World and needed humans to work for them on their plantations. And you know, once I want humans, you also want humans, and this happens to be the hub where we get some. Probably we have to fight to get lands, and with that, they themselves were fighting each other to occupy areas in here.
So what actually brought the Europeans to Africa wasn't humans, it was resources.
Earlier, it was resources.
Earlier it was
Yes.
resources.
From history, Europeans coming here, historically would say they came in for gold, and as well ivory, salt and others, until later within the 1500s where the demand started shifting to humans to work for them on their plantations within the New World as well.
How can someone from the Western world just barge into an unknown country and start trading people? Did this activity have any connection with local rulers at that time?
All right, so from the question you just asked, if I got you right, I'm trying to ask how come a foreigner or a different person would come to your place, all of a sudden would start actually picking your people out of this place. So let me just take us back to history a bit. You know, Europeans were coming to Africa. Earlier were saying they were in for resources. Some would say they came in as missionaries. Others would tell you that they were as well in for, let's say, to explore other areas. But you know, Europeans coming here had already got to know of Africa. Because earlier, before Europeans came to Africa, they had once been Arabs in Africa. And most of these Arabs, yes, most of these Arabs were also trading, just as the Europeans were trading as well. They would get humans, they would get natural resources. They would mostly move them to Europe to sell them. Sometimes they do also move them to their countries. So at a point, you know, the Europeans actually wanted to counter the Arabs. Because if always they are to get resources from the Arabs, it means they were acting as middlemen. Okay. So getting rid of them was the aspect that brought them here. And aside that, you know, they also got to that Africa itself is full of resources. And where you'd get majority of these resources within the western and the central part of Africa. Let me use the Portuguese for instance. You know, Portuguese would come to Africa. From Portugal to Africa would have been easier to use than not. But then ask yourself, how come they came to the west? Because of gold. At a point, they even got to know that there was this great emperor within Mali Empire by name Mansa Musa. And Mansa Musa actually had a pilgrimage from Mali to Mecca. Due to the resource he had, even caused inflation on some lands. So let me give you one typical country, that is Egypt. It cost Egypt almost 12 years before they could even revive their economy back to its normal state. So if I'm to ask, if you are a trader and then you get to know that, let's say you are into cocoa farming, and there's a particular place you probably get a lot of this cocoa, wouldn't you go there? So they knew these people had gold, of which Mansa Musa could even travel with almost like 20 or 2,000 entourage and still actually would decorate them with gold and all that. So with this, they wanted to know where his source of riches were coming from, and through that they ended up here. And while staying here too, you know, these Europeans had already planned everything they wanted before they came in. Stayed in Africa for some time, got to do the system, and they knew that Africans themselves practiced slavery.
Oh, wow.
Yes, we practiced slavery, just that our system of slavery was different from what the Europeans brought in here. So those days, if I do fight your group and I defeat your team, I'll fuse them into my system to grow. Okay. From a village, I can actually grow to become, let's say, a community. Communities can grow into, let's say, states. States became kingdoms, and kingdoms became empire. Yes, that the African system was that a servant could rise from his particular status and change to a different status. Let's say I'm a slave. Tomorrow I can become a master. How? If I prove to have managerial skills, the master can give me a land to start my own place. Kings could give slaves kingship titles, or let me say chief titles, for them to control areas for them. Okay. Some were even given wives, or let me say husbands in the community. So once you probably get married in the society, it means the descendants were no longer slaves. Europeans actually said they are going into the New World, and over there they started plantations. Out of the hardship and as well introduction of new diseases, these natives were dying in numbers. They had this priest by name Bartholomew de las Casas who suggested that Africans should be used. And how do we get these Africans? First, we have our own ways. We raid, kidnap Africans because we have weapons. Is it working? No. How do we get more of them? Now we fuse our system into the African system. How do we do it? We hide behind the leaders, their back, to get Africans. So if I'm an European from, let's say, England, and you are, let me say, from Denmark, you'll come in, get a particular group as your friends, and also get allies. So once I supply my allies with weapons, you'll also supply yours with weapons. They fight each other. Once my team defeats your enemy, your team, they bring me prisoners of war. And once your team also defeats my people, they will also bring you prisoners. So at the point, Europeans themselves were not raiding or kidnapping Africans. Rather, they leave it to the Africans to do it themselves. And most of the chiefs fell for the act because the focus here was, one, their freedom. If I also get weapons, I'll become powerful once again. Because I once was a state before I got fused into someone's empire or someone's kingdom. Aside that, I'll get the resource back because the land now belongs to me. If these white people were coming back to buy their resources, they wouldn't go back to the old chief, but then rather come to me. So in terms, it becomes a business trade between me and the European. And through that, most of the Africans were picked from this place. So they come in here, they knew the aspect of the human trade, just that, definitely they wouldn't tell you they came in for humans just to put themselves on the right path, or probably just to debunk the aspect of saying that they actually came and picked our people, but rather we sold our people out. I'm not sure any living person who actually is of his active state of mind would actually go out there and bring a son or a daughter to be enslaved, but then rather from different tribes that were not friends, that were not relatives, were those they would fight them, bring them here. And just as we know in wars, the more I reduce your numbers, there's an intensity of actually me within the war. So if I'm able to get your people into the castle, it means I'm reducing their numbers. So always I still have more troops at my side. So it was also a battle.
The more you get people into the castle.
So let me say you have about 1,000 troops. I have the same 1,000 troops. We fight. I captured about 100 of your troops. So it means now you have 900. I'm having 1,000 still. So if I were to go for the next war, who do you think would actually win?
You.
Definitely. So through that, they were always trying to get people to reduce the numbers of their enemies.
Okay. So at that time, some of the castles were built.
Yeah, the Europeans came in here, early point of their trade, they were actually building their castles.
Wow.
Some of them were also built whilst the trade was taking place.
Okay.
So let me use Cape Coast for instance. Whilst they were actually into the human trade, they were still building a castle because the castle went through different phases.
What does that mean?
What I'm trying to say is it didn't take them, let's say, a day or two to build a castle. The complete castle we see here took almost 300 years.
300 years?
But in the first phase of the castle, it took them almost 100 years. Before different governors coming in would add some structures till we see today.
Did they use our African labor force to build the castles, or they brought their own people?
The architecture design was from the English, but then the construction happens to be the captives and some craftsmen from the community. So they use African labor.
Considering everything that happened earlier over here, why do we still call it a castle instead of a dungeon?
Let me say, most visitors in here do ask, or probably would say it is not a castle. Some would also say it is not a dungeon. The structure we see here is a castle.
Okay.
Just that it played the role of a dungeon, more of being a castle. But in the years, you can't tell me that humans were not staying in here. So you can choose to call it a dungeon, you can choose to call it a castle.
Matter of choice.
Yes, matter of choice, let me put it that way.
So Cape Coast is a very, very broad place, like it's very big. Why did they choose this particular location to set up the castle?
Outside, we can see some rocks here. And as we do know, once you actually build your structure on a rock, or let me say on a mountain, you do have firm foundation. Aside that, it is closer to the sea. We all know the Europeans do like the sea to swim. Accessibility, easily to travel. And aside that, once there is any problem, easily they can escape through the sea with their ships always available there. They paint it white so that as well, when friends or others are coming, they can also get to that this happens to be, or they are closer to the land. So also serve as, let's say, a landmark for travelers or explorers. Okay,
so first of all, the rock for a solid foundation, and then the closeness also to the
sea for swimming, relaxation, then protection from enemies, and aside that, like I said, source of, let's say, a landmark for explorers or let me say visitors.
So far, like how many castles did they build nationwide?
Are you talking of Ghana?
Yeah, I'm talking about
Just Ghana, we have about 40 to 42 fort and castles that spread along the coast of West Africa. But then, in total, the coast of West Africa, about 60 of them were built. So if Ghana could hold over 40 of them, that should tell you that their focus was actually here.
Wow, the business was really booming here.
Here, aside the proximity and other stuff in terms of the landmark and all that, the natives here were actually friendly. They received them well, and aside that, gold they could get in abundance here.
Okay.
And out of the numbers they had in terms of the fort and castles, it was only 3 that were castles and the remaining were forts, like I said earlier, of which Elmina being the first. That is the St. George's Castle, which was built by the Portuguese somewhere 1482. The second one is the Christiansborg Castle, which was built by the Denmark 1661. And then this place we stand, Cape Coast Castle, also built by the English around 64, 65.
Why did they skip Cape Coast all the way to Christiansborg in Accra, right? And then later come back to Cape Coast?
Cape Coast Castle never started with the English. The Portuguese happens to be the first group in here, and the Portuguese came to Elmina 1471. 82 they built the Elmina Castle. But you know, once let's say you have a shop and the shop is going on or moving well, you need to expand your post. So the Portuguese added Cape Coast to their trading post. But then when they came in here, because of the nature of the environment, they named this place as Cabo Corso. In English, that is Short Cape. Sorry.
Short Cape.
Yeah.
Cabo Corso.
So within this area, because they already had a castle, they never erected a new castle, so they built a timberlock structure to trade. They stayed in for almost 100 years.
Wow.
But you know, staying here, they started attracting enemies because the business was profitable. So the Dutch actually would fight them at Elmina. The first, the second, and the third, the Dutch took over Elmina Castle. So the Portuguese left Elmina, they abandoned this land, and they went straight to the center of Africa, some would say to Angola, to Congo, to Mozambique, and then settled in Kenya. They built Fort Jesus. So the Swedish actually came in here and established the first fort on this land that we call Fort Karolesbeek. The Swedish spent almost 5 years here, and from nowhere the Denmarks came and fought the Swedish here. The Denmarks enjoyed the place for like as well almost 3 years. The natives of this land actually, some would say that the Dutch fought them, others would tell you that the natives rather actually took the land from them and gave it to the Dutch. And the Dutch also enjoyed the place for just 3 years. And the English came in and fought the Dutch here. Then the English actually erected this castle we are seeing. But I know the transition from the Denmark to the Dutch brought about the Christiansborg Castle. So when the Denmarks left this place, that was when they went straight to Osu to construct the Christiansborg Castle. So that is why they had the Christiansborg before Cape Coast Castle.
Wow. I'm mind blown so far by all the things that I'm hearing. This is even too much for me myself. Who were the major key holders and operators of this castle in the beginning?
Key holders, operators, as in people that were working in the castle?
Yeah, people who were in charge of the place.
So the first group that will come to mind should be soldiers.
Okay.
Soldiers should have a leader, so either an administrator or a governor. Traders were coming in here, so they have merchants in. Some would get sick, so they had nurses and doctors in.
Wow.
They were dealing with humans, dealing with exchange of goods, so probably need accountant and clerks in here. Aside that, they work with missionaries, so they had priests also in the castle. So approximately mostly you would find almost 200 people in the castle, of which about 150 of them would be soldiers. The remaining would be divisions of the people I made mention.
This was like a government on its own.
Yes.
A whole government on its own.
Administrative quarters. Yes.
You made mention of priests.
Yes.
Did religion play any role in the administration of the castles?
Yes, the religion actually played a role in the trade. You know, I always say that once you start to talk about this whole transatlantic slave trade and the church involvement in there, sometimes people even actually tell you that you're not actually a Christian, that you are this, you are that. And that's the truth. Religion played a major role in the trade. I made mention even the suggestion that was made by a man for the whole system to start was a Bakali priest. And if
Wow.
a Catholic priest actually could make the suggestion, it means they had a hand in the trade. And those days too, the same amount the traders were making, the same amount that the kings and queens were making, the church also made similar money. That is why the traditional churches like the Anglican Church, the Methodist Church, the Catholic Church, the Presbyterian Church earlier were that rich. Before today we had the Pentecostals and others in there. So they played a role. And even in this castle alone, they had 2 churches operating here.
2 churches.
Anglican Church was established first, before later the Methodist Church also came in. And the Anglican Church was actually right above the male slave dungeons. So whilst others were down there shouting, screaming for their lives, living within their pools and all that, others also were right above them, would say, love your neighbor as yourself. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery,
That's too hard.
and that shall not also steal. Because they themselves knew the right thing, but they were not doing the right thing. So Christianity brought Africans, they knew whatever they were doing was wrong, but then they could also support their fact with the Bible, making claims that everything they were doing was not wrong because it had been ordained or said in the Bible that this is what they should do. So what they were doing, they never saw it to be wrong. Saying or giving malicious claims that Africans were cursed and Africans actually, let me see, we are the cursed one from the Noah's family or whatever they do say.
I've heard that
stories
before.
surrounding these things.
I've heard that before. So, like, ever since civilization took place and like modernization also took part or took hold of the world, have we ever had like Europe try to compensate Africa as a whole for that slavery? Have they ever tried compensating Africa?
This is a very big question, and I would say if your viewers are listening to this, in here I'm not being racist, but I know in terms of aspect of compensating, who is going to compensate who and who is willing to compensate who. Europeans came to Africa, we had all the system here. Now some are even claiming this never happened.
Oh,
And
really?
had it not been even the fort and castle we have here, they would claim they never even came in here for the trade. Because you go to America, you go to other places, now they're even trying to clear off this history.
Wow.
Aside that, you know, in the world, once you hear of the world most wicked person or one of the wicked people in the world, in terms of history, what name do we hear? We hear of who? Hitler, Adolf Hitler. All because he was actually killing people. Who was he killing? The Jews. And who were they? They were also white people. But then never would they make mention of this man, King Leopold from Belgium, who could actually take off arms of Africans, who could actually kill humans in numbers. Today, you talk of reparation or something being given to Africans. If they are to do that, one, who is it going to be given to? Because, you know, African system is that it is not just Africans in Africa that suffered, Africans in the diaspora.
Okay.
So are they going to give it to Africans living in Africa or Africans living in the diaspora? That is one question you should ask yourself.
That's a very good point.
And then even if they are to give it, it is to be given to Africans living in Africa, if you're not united, they can't give you the money. Because they can't just give it to Ghanaians, because it wasn't only Ghanaians that suffered. They can't give it to Moroccans, or let me say, no, even Moroccans are out. Let me say they can't even give it to, let's say, someone from Kenya or Mozambique or any other place. So until we all get to unite and know what we want, there wouldn't be any reparation. Because it wouldn't be like only Ghanaians suffer, so we are bringing it to Ghana. Or it wouldn't be like it was, let's say, Congolese or anything. But then even if it is coming to Africans, like I said, Africans in Africa or Africans in the diaspora, this is the question we should be asking ourselves.
But in my humble opinion, why can't it go to the AU? Since we have an African Union, it can go to the African Union, and whatever the leaders want to do, maybe
So
they
African
can do it.
Union, is it going to the African living in Africa, that is those that are actually into the African Union?
Yeah,
What
the
about
countries
those
under
in
the
Jamaica?
African Union.
What about those in Brazil? What about those in Barbados? What about those in Trinidad and Tobago and others? Are we counting them? Because you would say they took your family member, but then your family member rather suffered out there.
That makes sense.
You get it?
That
So-
makes sense.
We live to see what happens tomorrow. We are just in to tell the history, to tell the story. But then what happens tomorrow, none of us here knows.
Thank you so much for that insight.
You're most welcome, sir.
So to add to everything that I've asked and to conclude everything that I've asked, what role does castles play today? Does it have any socio-economic impact on culture?
One, in terms of the economy, the site actually generates a lot of money for the state, for development. Two, the site serves as an educational site for students from different stages or level of academics to have research being made and other stuff. People do come in here to have fun. Others are also in to listen to the history. And aside that, this place is also a World Heritage Site, of which people from the outside world also come in here to study, to learn the history as well. So it plays a very vital role. And in terms of tourism itself, I can boldly say visitors from the outside world, most of them would come into Ghana purposely to know about the castle, to see whether truly these things happen here, because they do hear about it. So mostly they just want to come in. So once they come to Cape Coast, then probably they have to see this place, and after probably we'll go to Kakum or to other sites just to. So this castle actually do record a lot of visitors from the outside world as well.
Like from what you said, and then from what I learned from you, the castle also serves as a witness that slave trade actually happened here in Africa. Like you said, they would have even denied if not for the castles and forts that we have here in Africa. Thank you so much. So that is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for sticking with me throughout this video. I will put his details down in the description, so if you want to reach out to him or anything, or book a one-on-one tour with him, his details will be down in the description. I would encourage you to like and subscribe so that I can be able to go out there and then make more videos like this, more educational videos for you guys.